Hello, everyone, and welcome on into the Betting Pros College Football Look Ahead. It is a fantastic Sunday. Week one of the college football season is just about in our rearview mirror. We still have a few games tonight, but right now we are going to be taking a look ahead to next week, breaking down the lines that you need to be jumping on early. And of course, for all of that analysis, joining me here on the program, as always, the God of Thunder himself, Thor Nystrom. Thor, it is a great day. I'm feeling good coming off a fantastic Syracuse win that we're going to talk more about in this program. How are you doing today?
You're feeling good. I'm feeling good. You're looking good with that Syracuse shirt on. Epic day for Dino Babers and the Syracuse program yesterday, ambushing Louisville. We'll definitely get to that. But what a fun time it was to have a full slate of college football back on a Saturday. I was tickled pink yesterday.
It feels so good. You throw it on in the morning, right when you wake up for me here on the West Coast, and then you just have college football all throughout the day. Made some good bets. Actually didn't make any bad bets. I didn't make too many, but I was happy. I jumped in on Ohio State at the end of the third quarter, 4.5 live line. They covered that nicely for me. I was good to go. And of course, I want to bet on my Syracuse Orange. But right now, we are putting week one in the rearview mirror. We are moving on to week two here, and that has to start off with the biggest names, biggest game of the week here. It doesn't get much bigger than Texas versus Bama. And the line right now in this one is a whopping 18. And, I was actually going to be going with Bama in this spot. I don't care what the spread is because I do not believe Texas is back. But you have some thoughts on where this game actually should be.
Yeah, I think the line is a little objectively short right now. My adjusted line on this one is Alabama by 14.5. Keep in mind that this game is in Austin, so Alabama's going to have to travel there. But all that being said, I understand why it's inflated, 3.5 points roughly, and only over one key number, which is, one of the most key numbers. So, I think basically by setting that number at 18, Vegas is allowing the market to bet it one way or the other. Whether that comes down closer to 17 or whether the money goes the other way. And then you got a couple points to get up to 20. But I think objectively the fair spread would be about 14.5. We didn't get a ton of information on these two teams on Saturday because they were both playing crappy opponents. I will say, though, I watched parts of both of those games. Alabama looked as advertised, and I spent all summer talking about how this Alabama team profiled as a team that could be one of the best of my lifetime in college football. They looked every bit of that. Now, again, they were playing Utah State. So it's, you take it somewhat with a grain of salt, although Utah State did win 11 games last year, although they struggle with UConn in the opener. So, however you want to view that. But Bryce Young having the 5 throwing touchdowns in the first half, he ran for a bunch of yards too, and had a rushing touchdown. By the time it was halftime, it was already a laugher. They were pulling all the starters. And then Texas, they didn't run away with it quite as much against UL Monroe, but they were also yanking their starters super duper early. This game is going to be really interesting to see what is Quinn Ewers. We were not going to get an indictment of that or a referendum on that in the UL Monroe game. He got his Aston Martin towed during the game, though. I don't know if you saw that on Twitter.
No.
Yeah, he got to tell it during the game. And I also found it funny what kind of car that 19-year-old is driving. What a life if you're Quinn Ewers. But they pulled Ewers early, which you knew they were going to do. They wanted to get Hudson Card work. They pulled Bijan early, which you probably knew that they were going to do, not trying to get him hurt and everything like that. But I think for this game, the cliff notes of it is the objectively fair spread is a little bit lower than it is. But if you want to bet Bama, certainly understand you just have to pay a tax.
I mean, I think I'm gonna have to pay that tax. As much as I hate taxes in this particular instance, I am here for sitting down on my couch and watching Texas get a preview of what is to come when they join the SEC and how big of a mistake this might just be for them. I'm ready to see this happening here. And the NIL deals, I mean, obviously, you got this guy riding around in an Aston Martin at 19. The cash is already coming in, but they haven't really been able to buy all of the players that they want just yet. So we're still not going to see the same Texas. I think Bama's going to be able to walk all over him in this game.
And also, as you know, Nick Saban's former assistants have not been able to buy wins against Nick Saban.
Yep.
I believe that Jimbo Fisher last year, when they upset him with Zach Calzada, and I'm upsetting Bama, I believe that was the first time Nick Saban had ever lost to an assistant, maybe one other time, but it's either once or twice. His record against his former assistants is one of the most absurd records in all of sport. Kirby Smart. That was the second one. So it's only happened twice. They were both last year. But I mean, prior to that, he had this ridiculously long winning streak. Sark this is not sort of the matchup that you're looking forward to in week 2 if you're Sark, but it's certainly going to provide a very definitive measuring stick for the Longhorns.
So I want to move on from Bama, but before I do, you mentioned that this could potentially be the best team that you've ever seen. So you think that this Bama team is better than the 2 a year?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, the offense, you can't put it up against 2019 LSU because that one is like the most dominant modern offense, maybe even the most dominant offense in college football history. But this offense for Bama is just a step below that, I think. But their defense is better. I want to see, and this is going to be a great one, when they play a team like Texas with all the offensive weapons that Texas has, but they play an offense like that, and then some of the SEC offenses that they're going to face. I want to see how that defense does, but they have so many studs on that defense, of course, led by Will Anderson, who appears to be the second coming of like Derek Thomas crossed with Lawrence Taylor. That kid is stupid. Like it's ridiculous. You don't often, where you're watching the defender and you can't take the eyes off of the defender. But whenever Will Anderson is on the field, you're watching Will Anderson and not the opposing offense. Ridiculously good. And that kid's probably as close to a lock to go in the top 3 in April as you can possibly get at this time, especially for a defender.
All right, now moving on from Bama, moving down the board here, another big matchup, or at least a big brand name rivalry matchup here. We have USC versus Stanford. The line's at 10.5. And you think that this one is a little bit like right around where it should be?
I do. Yeah. And USC, the lines, it's one of those things when you're running your numbers on Sunday, they're one of the first teams I look down to see where that number ends up when it pops up. Because I'm always curious this season I'm going to be very curious what their spreads are every single game, because they're another team like Bama where you would presume that you would have to pay the tax. The interesting thing about this one was last week we had talked about that where it was a bit over on Rice, against my number. USC ends up covering it pretty easily anyway because the defense ended up stepping up. They had all these different pick sixes. Stanford, it's a totally different thing where Rice, they don't really have a quarterback. They play like 3 of them and none of them are good. Stanford, that's one of the things that they're the best at. They have an NFL prospect at quarterback in Tanner McKee. And this line, going back to my original point, and to what you were saying, very in line, my projected number with the Las Vegas spread. The line opened at USC minus 10.5. My line's actually USC minus 11.2. So, conversely, I actually am showing just the slightest bit of value on USC, but this is a very tricky matchup for them. We talked last week about how they were going up against Mike Bloomgren, David Shaw's former offensive coordinator, and what Bloomgren was going to try to do to keep that score closer. He wasn't able to succeed because of how bad his quarterbacks are. Now USC goes and plays the real David Shaw, right? The mentor to Bloomgren, and Shaw can actually do it. They have a bunch of ballyhoo guys on their offensive line, but the really important thing for Stanford in this game is, will that offensive line take this step forward when last year I don't know another way to put it, they stunk, especially in comparison to what their recruiting pedigree was. Over the offseason, did that group jump up any? Stanford needs to be able to control this ball, or they need to be able to move the chains on the ground. And if they're able to do that, McKee, through the play action passing game, is going to hit some explosive passes. But that's definitely going to be the key for them. I also just thought it's notable to note that this line is not being taxed by Vegas, for USC like the last one was.
That is an important thing to watch out for. I mean, they were able to steam Rice last week. This one, like you said, the quarterback play going to be a little bit of a step up. And this is a rivalry game. These teams do hate each other a lot. We'll see. It's going to be an interesting one. 10.5, 11 points. Wherever the line ends up falling, I might actually have to throw something on this. Want to track all of your wagers in one place? Check out the Betting Pros Pick Tracker at bettingpros.com/pick tracking. It syncs up with your sportsbooks to tally which picks hit and which miss, and gives you a live look at what the public is doing so you can use real-time tracking to determine which plays to make and which to fade. Get on the leaderboard and quickly become a sharp by using the free advice we have to offer at bettingpros.com/pick tracking. But let's move on here to Baylor, because they are absolutely on fire after that week 1 win, and they're going to be taking on the Stormin' Mormons of Brigham Young. BYU only a 3-point. And wait, am I reading this right? BYU favored in this one?
Yeah. The BYU opened as was it 3-point favorites. My adjusted line, or I'm sorry, BYU opened in Vegas as a 2.5-point favorite. My adjusted line on it is BYU -3. In my power ratings, these two teams are very, very close. BYU, they get the few extra points because of the home field advantage. That's basically why they're favored by the 2.5, by the 3. It's an interesting game, right? Like Baylor, I felt that the market and the sports books were sleeping on them over the summer. I thought the win total number that the sports books tossed up for Baylor, 7.5, was disrespectful. There weren't many teams where you looked at it and you're like, wow, that is not a lot of respect in comparison to what we just saw that team was and what they have back and stuff like that. I was definitely and am definitely higher on Baylor than the market and then the sports books are. You mentioned their first game. They opened against an FCS team, but what was really the defense dominated. Of course, the team they were playing couldn't move the ball at all. But
the U Albany Great Danes.
Yeah, the Great Danes. Yeah, the more notable thing was Blake Shapen looked awesome. He was the quarterback that they chose over Jerry Bohannon. Jerry Bohannon was Baylor's starter last year. He did a decent job. Baylor made a big bowl game. They won double-digit games, but Bohannon was a bit limited. He was a dual threat who could get the ball down the field, but he had some accuracy issues that the coaching staff felt held back the offense. So they actually named Blake Shapen the starter coming out of spring ball. And I had asked my Baylor contact. I said. I want to be like, what's his face on the NBA, ESPN NBA, when he says, now, why would they do that? A Windhorse, yeah. Now, why would Baylor do that? Why would they tell their starter from last year that he is not going to start in spring ball when you know that he's going to transfer once he hears that news? And what my Baylor contact told me was, exactly. They wanted to slough off Jerry Bohannon. They wanted to give this job to Shapen and let Shapen know, like, it's your job. They knew they were going to lose Bohannon, and they were cool with that. So Shapen looked good. The passing game looked good, but the starters were getting yanked early. So, we don't have a referendum on the whole thing yet. BYU, we were just talking about Jerry Bohannon. They actually opened with South Florida, who is now starting Jerry Bohannon at starting quarterback. BYU annihilated USF, which the past couple of years would not have been impressive. USF was one of the worst teams in all of college football. I do think that they're significantly improved this year. That was not the matchup to show it, of course, but they had a whole bunch of starters back and they had Bohannon back. So I actually think beating them by 29 on the road is impressive, contextually. This one, the spread of the game is probably too close for me to end up betting this, but I am super bullish on Baylor this year. And so I'm definitely going to consider that if that line stays beneath 3, it's a game I'm going to handicap this week. And if by the time I decide on where I want to go with it, if it's still beneath 3, I'll consider laying a bet on Baylor, but I did not bet that one yet today.
Now the next one up here, it was an upset and a heartbreaking upset for you. Utah losing to Florida in Gainesville, and now Florida, they are going to be 5.5-point favorites against Kentucky in their next matchup here. And you think that now the pendulum is swinging back the other way. Florida's now getting too much respect.
I do. Yeah. I mean, if that game, Utah was basically what I thought they were going to be. Utah played really well, and they had control of that thing for the longest times. And then Anthony Richardson just pulled out the Superman cape at the end of the game, punctuated by that absolutely ridiculous play on the 2-point conversion where Utah had him dead to rights. 2 different guys rushing free, and he sloughed one of them off, and then he ran around the other one and then hit a guy wide open in the end zone. No one is even close to him. and they end up winning by 3. But if that thing had gone, a couple of those other bounces had gone against them, I think this game, you're talking about an opening line that would have been much closer to my adjusted number. As is, Florida opens a 5.5-point favorite, which struck me as a little bit rich in the moment. I ran my numbers. I have Florida minus 2.6 in this game. I think that tax, it's only because of what happened at the very, very end of that Utah game. Florida did look a bit better than I thought they would, for sure. I mean, like we had talked last week on the show about the couple specific areas that we needed to see Florida like sort of actionable against a good team, the offensive line and then the defense. The offensive line absolutely looks better. That kid that Napier brought from Louisiana, this enormous offensive guard, like 330 pounds, he was really good against Utah. And then I think some of the other guys around him, the returning guys, have gotten a little bit better as well. They don't have to play for Dan Mullen and that dippy offensive line coach they had anymore either, so maybe that helps as well. But Florida's a bit better than I thought, 7 days ago. But we can't forget about Kentucky either. Talking about Anthony Richardson putting on the Superman cape. Will Levis, looked really good yesterday as well when they played Miami of Ohio. Not the best opponent, but Levis went 21 for 32, 303 yards, 3 touchdowns, showed off the mobility again. And Miami of Ohio, they're not like a bottom 15 team. Like they're sort of a mid-tier G5, not an FCS team, or it's not like UMass or something like that. They controlled that game, and put them away emphatically in the second half. This is a fascinating game where it's which quarterback is going to show up and sort of like, how do I put this? When we're leaving that game, who are all the announcers going to be like, that guy just proved that he is the guy to go in the first round. He just planted his flag like in the first round. The whoever wins this quarterback matchup they're probably going to end up covering the spread. I do like Kentucky in this game. I think that the line is too high. I would be a little bit surprised if the line doesn't fall back a little bit. I would expect it to be closer to 4 by kickoff. Vegas sort of put that, I was talking before about the dead zone that they had set that other number in. They put this one in there as well at 5.5, where they're going to let the market sort of decide and bat it one way or the other. But with that many points, I like Kentucky.
Now, let's move on here from some of these larger games, the big brand names, and let's go and talk about some of the games that you actually do feel the spreads are very much off and where we do have some betting advantage here. And let's start off with the largest discrepancy you have between your line and Vegas. Arizona versus Mississippi State. U of A 7.5-point dogs at home in this one. And you think that line is just playing off?
I do. Yeah. And it's this is an interesting stance for me to take because all of last week I was talking about Arizona on my live stream with Mike Farrell, yesterday. Thomas is the producer on that. I was talking about, Wildcats, take the Wildcats on the money line, stuff like that. They end up upsetting San Diego State. They were one of the most surprising teams of week one, sort of what I had hoped, and some other people in the industry that were sort of bullish on what Jed Fish was doing, their head coach behind the scenes, this past offseason, signing a top 25 recruiting class, signing close to a top 25 transfer portal class and everything like that. We knew that the talent was better. They're going to be way better at quarterback, way better in the receiving room. The defense was going to improve again, et cetera, et cetera. And all that stuff, we could see it on the field yesterday against San Diego State. Arizona, it wasn't a close win. They ended up winning that game by 18 points. At halftime, they were up 24-10. They never looked back. DeLora looked really good for his debut there, 22 of 35 for 299 yards, 4 touchdowns. The kid who looked really good was the receiver that they brought in from UTEP, Jacob Cowing, 8 catches, 152 yards, and 3 touchdowns. But all that being said, I feel like that upset win, sort of that emphatic upset win on the road, like I feel like Vegas knew that there was some sharps that were circling Arizona, a bunch of people that had bet the over, a bunch of my sharp friends have bet the over on that. Was a very low number, 3.5, something like that over the summer. So they knew people were bullish on Arizona. Then they watch Arizona go out and absolutely whip a San Diego State team that is always solid every single year. They're winning double-digit games or right under it in the G5. I feel like this line has way overcorrected. because I feel like the sports books are sort of trying to protect their backside from getting hammered on Arizona again, like they did in week 1. So they flipped this line to try to incentivize bets on the other side. My adjusted line on this one was like Mississippi State. Let me pull it up real quick. My adjusted line in this game is Mississippi State minus 14.1. But live, what it opened at was Mississippi State minus 7.5. I think that line needs to be in the double digits. I recognize that the game is in Arizona. That's fine. Again, I loved what Fish did. I was advocating for him, in the summer and then last week as well. But this Mississippi State team is really, really good. And I think that there's an enormous qualitative difference between these two teams that you're going to see manifest on the field on Saturday. Arizona was impressive in week 1. So was Mississippi State. Mississippi State looked friggin' awesome. They were probably playing a team. Well, I guess maybe you'd say that they were maybe close coming in, but they were playing Memphis, another super duper solid G5 team. Mississippi State boat raced them. They beat them 49-23. Will Rogers threw for 450 yards and 5 touchdowns. I mean, and now they're going and playing this Arizona State team where probably their biggest question mark is on defense. The line's too short, and it's an overreaction to what Arizona did. I like Mississippi State in that one.
The next one up is going the other way a little bit here. Penn State playing Ohio. Not Ohio State, but just Ohio. The spread in this one, Penn State by 25.5. And you don't think that's enough points to be giving them?
Yeah, I mean, you asked me on the show last week. We had a discussion about this, about when do you bet, with the really high numbers, when it's, around, when you're getting over 24 and you're getting up high 20s or into the 30s. And, I told you I generally stay away from those games, but when I bet them, it's usually on the underdog in situational spots where I think I'm getting the advantage there. This one is one of those rare instances where I actually like the favorite in a game with a big spread. I was surprised this line was released at 25.5. It seems at least 3 points short to me, to be honest. My adjusted line on it is Penn State minus 31.2. Ohio, and they probably got a couple of points of credit on the spread, Ohio, for beating Florida Atlantic on Saturday. Florida Atlantic was a team that in week 0 had blown out. They blown out an FBS team. Was it Charlotte, right? They beat Charlotte. So, and then, so Florida Atlantic had beaten Charlotte by 30 points in week 1. Then they turn around and Ohio beats them. That's really the only thing I can point to explain the close to 6 point discrepancy here, why Ohio is getting this kind of credit. But Ohio, it's not like they were like awesome in that game. Like they had to fend off Florida Atlantic at the very end. N'Kosi Perry, Florida Atlantic's quarterback, threw for 364 yards and 5 touchdowns in that game. Ohio was getting ripped on their defense. I'm okay with Ohio. Like, as far as a MAC team, I think I was a little bit higher on them than some others heading into the season. But this is a totally, different animal heading into playing Penn State in that environment. And with where this line is set, the value is on the favorite. And it's one where I would bet it early in the week, because I expect by kickoff that this thing is going to be north of 28 points. So if you grab this one now and get it under 28, that's a ticket you're going to be want to be holding on Saturday, I think.
Now, how about this battle of two teams that Syracuse has a bit of a rivalry with here? We've got Northwestern going up against Duke, and Northwestern 8-point favorites in this one. And same story, you feel that this is not enough.
No, I don't. Yeah, we got the Nerd Bowl here, don't we? Yeah, I mean, the live, it opens up at 8. My adjusted line on this game was Northwestern minus 13.4. So I have an overlay of 4 points of value showing for Northwestern. Duke is another one where, this is going to be the example in several of these games where I talk about where the value's on the other side. Duke looks surprisingly good in week 1. They beat Temple 30-0. And I think that's a part of the reason why this line opens up beneath 10, where I think it probably should open up more like 10.5, 11 range, something like that. You got to keep in mind, Temple is an abomination. They have been for years. It is not getting any better. And the last guy they had in there, Terry or whatever, they got rid of him. But the talent level had sunk so far on that squad. And they did not go out and sign the transfer portal guys, I think, that I would have, being a new coach taking over like a sort of a cratered out situation like that. There was more continuity than I would have liked because the continuity was bad players. And that's what we saw in week one. I'm not going to give Duke a whole bunch of credit for blowing out a bad Temple team. Northwestern, they beat a legitimate team. We in a very wonky circumstance. When they in week 0 you go to Dublin and you beat Nebraska in a game where you had to come back, and the offense played very well. And they had to sort of get a couple bounces, and then they had to have Scott Frost help them out with his stupid onside kick call and everything like that.
That was incredible.
It's crazy.
Was just nuts.
Vintage Scott Frost.
Yeah. How is he still there?
Yeah, every single close game, it's all the close losses. He figures out a way to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, and then that was the way he did it there. But that being said, even if Northwestern had lost that game by a field goal as opposed to winning it by a field goal, I still would have been way more bullish on them than I was heading in. We had sort of talked about like offensive line really good for Northwestern. Skoronski's a round 1 prospect, stuff like that. We knew the backfield depth was going to be awesome because Cam Porter was coming back, and Cam Porter looked good. So did Claire and Hall specifically in their first game. But Helinski, he was the guy that their Northwestern's quarterback, where that was the thing that you wanted to see, because Helinski was terrible last season. He had transferred in there. He had like a truncated, weird camp. The coaches had given him a lot of excuses and were like, over the off season, they were talking up Helinski as this guy whose game was going to jump up. Now that he'd been around the team for a year, now that he was going to get a full camp, everything like that. There was a lot of pessimism in the media expressed about Helinski's ability to do so. But he actually played really well. Again, it was Nebraska, but he played really well in that first game. I think Northwestern is not getting enough credit in this game. Like I said, I think this spread should be low double digits, like -10 to -11 range. -8 is too short. Northwestern is one of the tickets that I'm currently holding that I bought this morning. So I like Northwestern in that one.
Guys, real quick, remember when you're looking for free picks and sports betting advice, bettingpros.com has you covered with tips from over 150 experts to make it easy for you to cash out. Download the app to get sports betting alerts. You'll get notified of favorable bets based on line movements, consensus picks from the most accurate experts, and vetted systems in play. Betting Pros monitors all of the major sportsbooks, most accurate experts, and top systems to identify the best betting opportunities. So download today in the Apple or Google Play stores.
The next one up here for us, and this is a bit surprising to me, but maybe not surprising, but New Mexico takes on Boise State, and Boise State on the road 17-point favorites despite the absolute lackluster performance yesterday.
Yeah, and my line, let's touch on that first. Boise State, man, was at a shocking game and just an absolute terrible performance. I don't know if that was just so what Hank Bachmeier, their quarterback, ends up getting benched in the first half after he had turned the ball over 3 times. By that point, the game was already so far away from Boise that it wasn't like the backup quarterback came in and actually played pretty good. And I'll talk about that in a second, because that's a kid that may be starting in this game. We'll have to see about that. But by that point, the game script had gotten so far away from you, it was hard to take stuff from that. So it's like, was that game just Hank Bachmeier woke up and on the wrong side of the bed and then just sort of gave that game away before, and it's not going to be predictive for these next 11 games? Or did we get sort of a little insight into new Boise State? That we expect Boise State to always be a specific thing. They're one of the most consistent teams in college football. Could that game yesterday have been an indication that they're going to be taking a slight step backwards this year? This game probably is not going to provide the referendum on that. However, if they don't cover this number, then it might be pointing towards that. My number on this game was, it opens at 17, Boise State -17. My number on this game is Boise State -22.4. So I'm showing value on Boise State. However, I will say that number does not bake in injuries or, quarterback questions or whatever. It's just sort of like, in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
So you have the quarterback thing going on at Boise State. They also had a couple key injuries They had a rotational a rotational receiver who broke his leg, who's going to be out for the season, but they thought this kid could break out this year. So that one hurt. Austin Bolt, what was this kid's name? They also lost their top cornerback, Markel Reed, to an injury in that Oregon State game. It looks like both those guys are going to, well, certainly Bolt is going to miss this game. It looks like Reed could miss this game as well. He needed a cart to get off the field. So they might be without one of their top corners. In this game, though, that shouldn't matter quite as much because New Mexico, they don't really throw the ball. They had brought in one of my former friends at University of Kansas, backup quarterback Miles Kendrick, who's like this little teeny squirt of a quarterback who scrambles around. And New Mexico is trying to fold more option concepts into the offense this year, I think because they knew they weren't going to be able to throw the ball anyway. So they're trying to run. So maybe the loss of Reed doesn't hurt as much. But the bigger thing for Boise State in deciding, or in informing if they're going to be able to cover a number at 17 right now is what do they do at quarterback and how does that guy play? If they go back with Bachmeier, do we get the Bachmeier we got the last couple years, where he's steady Eddie in the pot? Remember Brett Rippon from Boise State, like a guy like that, or a right-handed Kellen Moore, maybe, maybe a step back from that, but something like that. Or are you going to get Bad Hank again? Or are they going to go with the freshman, this kid that they played in the last game, who is totally different from the Boise State quarterbacks that we've seen in recent years? This kid's name was Talon Green. He became the first Boise State quarterback to rush for over 100 yards in a game since 2014. And he did that in, 2.5 quarters or whatever, finished 19 for 28, 155 yards, did throw an interception, but he also ran for 2 touchdowns in addition to running for over 100. It's a very interesting decision there. I do think that there's some value on Boise, but I did want to mention some of those other ancillary factors that could explain why this number is a bit lower, or that Vegas opened this number a bit below what my projected numbers are.
The next one up, the Terrapins take on Charlotte in Charlotte. And the spread in this one, Maryland favored by 25.5 points here, Thor. And you think that maybe shouldn't be that high?
No, I don't. Now, this one, you can certainly explain it because Charlotte's looked like legitimately one of the worst teams in the FBS over the first 2 weeks. They get smacked around by an FAU team that turns around and loses to a mid-tier MAC team in Ohio. And then the next week, Charlotte loses at home by 17 points to FCS William and Mary. That's
not great.
No, it's not great. And like you could be like, well, at least Charlotte was leading heading into the fourth quarter. But then someone else could just counter but they got outscored 21-0 in the fourth quarter by an FCS team when Charlotte had already lost their opener. It's not a must-win game, I suppose. It's Charlotte, but that's a game that you can't lose. You can't lose that after you just coughed away the opener. So now Charlotte's 0-2. Again, have not looked good. But Charlotte does have talent on that team. Their receiving core in particular is very, very good. And it did look like Will Healy was about to make a jump last year before that team cratered down the stretch. And now they've started even worse than they ended last year. The one thing I will say about Charlotte, I am showing this line value on them. A part of the offensive struggles they have coincided with the injury to Chris Reynolds, their starting quarterback. They tried to go with this James Foster kid who had signed with Texas A&M originally. He transferred in there, so you could understand why Charlotte would want to go with him. He's not looked the best so far. They've also tried this kid named Xavier Williams. Williams looked better against William and Mary. He threw for a little over 200 yards, rushed for 2 touchdowns. But they're going to have to figure something out with that quarterback situation until they get Reynolds back. That being said, Charlotte is a side that I'm going to be sniffing around this week because, in my opinion, Maryland should not be laying near 4 touchdowns on the road to almost any FBS team. Maryland does have the good passing offense, but the rushing offense, I'm not sure about that yet. I think that's not, that's like an average or a little bit below average FBS type unit. And then the defense has had all kinds of issues too. So if Charlotte's offense is doing anything at all, it's certainly if the quarterbacks can get the ball to that really, really strong receiving core that Charlotte has, I think that Charlotte should be able to stay within this number.
The next game up here is a Big Ten matchup. At least I'm pretty sure it's a Big Ten matchup now. Both of these teams, I think this team has moved into the conference. Michigan is going to take on Hawaii in this one in the Big House, and Michigan laying 48.5 in this one.
Yeah, I mean, much less Hawaii getting an invitation into the Big Ten. After their first couple of games, they might need to worry about getting kicked out of the MWC. Legitimately, one of the worst teams in the FBS.
I legit want to see this. I want to see conference realignment end with Hawaii in the ACC. Make it the Any Coast Conference.
Well, that would be good. You know, I would love it if they were in the Big Ten. As an Iowa grad, being able to travel to the away games, there would be no better road trip than Honolulu, of course. But Hawaii, you know, we're talking about different levels and context of this stuff. But for where they were, one of the most disappointing teams objectively over the first couple weeks of college football. The first game, they got absolutely boat raced by Vanderbilt. I had heard a quote where Vanderbilt, like, they were talking about how, like, they weren't even scoring that many points against, like, their scout team. And then they go and put up 60 plus at Hawaii. And then the next week, this past week, Hawaii had another, just an absolute stinker of a performance. That one was at home against Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky the week before struggled mightily to put away an FCS team. Then the next week, they have to travel 4,000 miles to Honolulu, and then they beat the crap out of Hawaii. Hawaii has not been able to find a starting quarterback. That's their biggest issue right now, because obviously Timmy Chang, the new coach, bringing back the run and shoot. You have to have a guy there that can throw the ball. They started it out with this Brendan Schrager kid. I knew Brendan Schrager stunk because I watched him last year when Shavon Cordero was injured. He has okay arm strength, but he's one of those kids that can't hit the broadside of a barn. Like, his accuracy is really, really bad. And so you had him in the last game, he threw 4 interceptions. He only had 230 yards on 33 attempts. Then they went to Joey Yellen at the very end of the game, a guy who had been at Valley, who'd recruited at his former stop. He wasn't much better, 4 of 11 for 36 yards and an interception. We haven't seen Kamon Cooper yet. He was a 4-star that had signed with Mike Leach at Wazoo back in the day. They might want to give Kamon Cooper a look because these other 2 kids are not it. Hawaii, again, one of the worst teams in the FBS. Now you go to Michigan, a team that has been very, very good, especially since the start of last season at covering large spreads, which you would not typically associate with them. I believe that Jim Harbaugh is 5-1 against the spread in his last 6 games as a 30-plus point favorite. That probably those 2 things, Hawaii's stinking, and then that probably in conjunction explains why this line, you get sticker shock when you look at it. Like, it opened right now it's 48.5. It opened lower than that. It was funny when the lines opened today. I think it opened at 40. It was like at 45 or maybe 46, like something like that. And one of my buddies, who's a Michigan alum, had texted me like, "Oh my God, like, have you seen the Michigans?" You know, your eyes kind of bug out when you see it. And I told him what my adjusted number on that game was, which is Michigan minus 43.8. But then, you know, in the couple hours between when I was texting with him and then coming onto this show, that line, the early money is very clearly coming in on Michigan. That line's already up to Michigan minus 48.5. By the time we get to kickoff, we may have the Michigan Wolverines laying over 50 points, which is going to be absolutely crazy and bonkers. But in this case, it's probably justified. My system is showing a little bit of line value on Hawaii. I don't think I can take the Rainbow Warriors up on that, though, after what I've seen and because of Jim Harbaugh's recent success at laying enormous numbers.
Tommy DeVito and the orange and blue of Illinois did not get it done for us this weekend, but now they play another orange team here in the Virginia Cavaliers, and they are laying 3.5 points in this one. And you think that quite frankly, the wrong side is favored here.
I do. And don't get me started on that Illinois-Indiana game.
That was brutal. I tailed you on that. I tailed you.
My gosh. I not only did I bet the sides and stuff like that, and I had money line tickets, I also had Illinois in a couple parlays. And so where they were the only leg that ended up losing, I had a joke on Twitter that I got Bielema mud.
I still want to know, How did they waive off a too many men on the field penalty there and redo the down? That made no sense to me.
There was a lot of things about that game that didn't make any sense. And yeah, Bielema, at times he was like acting more aggressive than you would think, with some decisions. Then other ones he was acting way too conservative. Like even Mike Zimmer was watching the game at home and being like, you should probably go for it there, whatever. It was just a really weird coach game. At least Bielema had some self-awareness after the game and is like, this one's on me. Like, we probably should have won that game and yada, yada. This game, you mentioned the line opens at 3.5. It's sort of a similar situation to what we were talking about last week, with Illinois, just flipped, where Illinois, my system had them as a short favorite and Indiana had opened as a 3.5-point favorite. In this one, Virginia, my system has them installed as the 1.1-point favorite. So I'm showing 4.6 points of line value on the Cavaliers. Illinois, very clearly delineated team. We know what we're going to get from them. They're going to play in all these close games that are going to be decided by coin flips at the end, unless the team is just way better than them. Virginia, we're going to have to see, but they have so much talent, specifically in the passing game. With Brennan Armstrong back, and then the receiving core. I think this is maybe what people don't realize. They have one of the best receiving cores in the FBS. They legitimately go 4 deep with guys that are going to play in the NFL. The rest of their team is what they're going to have to sort out. But you have a dominant passing attack on the one side. I think that they match up pretty well against Illinois. Like, Bazelak stinks, and Indiana's receiving core stinks, but they had some successful passing plays against Illinois. Illinois does not have the best secondary. And so I think Virginia is basically going to be able to move the ball at will against them. I do think Illinois is going to be able to do the thing of running. But if Illinois wants to go score for score with Virginia, I don't think it's going to turn out well for them. And speaking to something that we had talked about in a previous episode about how Bielema wanted to go more up-tempo with DeVito, they're not playing breakneck pace, but they are playing a bit faster than we've seen in recent years. Bielema seemed to be leaning towards wanting to do that all season. If he comes into this game and sees how fast Virginia plays, because they're a team that plays at the breakneck pace, if Virginia could sort of reel Brett Bielema in to even ticking up his pace of play a little bit more, that is going to play into Virginia's hands, not into Brett Bielema's hands. This is the kind of game where Brett Bielema needs to coach like he used to and run that play clock down to 2 every time before the snap. Illinois needs to protect their defense in this game. Give them as much rest as possible before the next time they have to defend Brennan Armstrong and all those receivers across the field. But I do like Virginia in this game. I think the wrong team is favored.
All right. I will probably be telling you on that one for sure with Virginia. But right now, let's move to another team in orange here. And it's an OSU team as well. Oregon State going to head down the interstate on the interior of California to take on Fresno. And Oregon going to be favored by a point in this one. And again, another case where you think the wrong team is the slight favorite here.
Yeah, and it's another instance of an overreaction to a week 1 game. Oregon State, as we were talking about a little bit ago, looked awesome against Boise State in the opener. They went 34-17, and it was a game that essentially was over even before halftime. At halftime, that game was 24-0, and like I said, Bachmeier had been benched, and they bring in this freshman, et cetera. So you have that, and I think that that you're going to have to pay a little bit of a tax on Oregon State if you want to go to that side. Meanwhile, with Fresno, they look pretty good too. It's just it wasn't as marquee of a matchup. So I don't think that Fresno State is quite getting the respect probably that they should be. Week 1, they played an FCS opponent, Cal Poly. They beat the crap out of Cal Poly, but it's Cal Poly, whatever. But remember, Fresno State brings back an NFL prospect at quarterback, legitimate one, in Jay Kaner, who's going to throw for 1 billion yards this year. He had 377 last week for 2 touchdowns, went 36 for 42. That's pretty stupid. They also, interestingly enough, they had brought back a couple good, really good wide receivers. They seem to have found another one in the transfer portal. This kid named Nico Remigio, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He had been at Cal for a couple different years. And, it was just like a solid sort of veteran. There wasn't as much excitement about him as some of these other guys that had entered the transfer portal. Fresno State signs him as a transfer in what I think is going to come to be viewed as a very, very sneaky signing. Remigio broke out in the first game, 9 catches for 100 yards. He was getting peppered with targets right from the jump. I think it's very possible that Remigio was just caught in an awful circumstance with Cal, because that's a team that does not want to throw. You know, Justin Wilcox, their coach, former defensive coordinator at Wisconsin, very much plays in that, you know, Brett Bielema ethos, you know, of slowing the game down, not as much throwing, clock control, running the ball, stuff like that. Remigio looks like he's a player for Fresno State. Fresno State has a bunch of guys coming back as well. I like Fresno State a little bit more than Oregon State, just in a vacuum. And Fresno State is the team that's at home in this one. My line in this game is Fresno State minus 2.3. Vegas decided to open Oregon State as the very small favorite at -1. I think in large part because of that performance against Boise State. But a lot of that stuff I don't think is translatable. You're not going to get 3, first quarter turnovers from Jake Haener like you did in that game. And then the next 3 quarters, you really don't have to play the game. This one they're going to have to earn. And I like Fresno State.
The next game up here, a lot of offense last week. I was really, quite frankly, impressed yesterday in 4 innings. A good work for the Iowa Hawkeyes, winning 7-3 over South Dakota State in what is the weirdest scoreline you may ever see. For 3 first quarter points, 3 second quarter points, and 2 safeties in the third and fourth quarter to get us to 7. You don't see that every day, but can they get the offense going against Iowa State in this one where they're 3.5-point favorites?
Not only do you not see it every day, we don't even remember the last time we saw it. My friend Eric Edholm from NFL.com and put out a tweet that it was at least through the year 2000, since the year 2000, no other team has scored exactly 7 points via 2 safeties and a field goal. So at least Iowa was figuring out a creative way to win this ball game. Their defense also ended up outscoring both of the opposing offenses. It was also hilarious, the 2 scoring drives. There was 2 field goals in the game. And
yeah.
Of course, I watched every down. You probably see my mug. I'm an Iowa grad. So I subjected myself to it. The 2 scoring drives, one of them, Iowa's field goal, they had gotten the ball in awesome field position because they pinned South Dakota State really deep. And so then they punted it, they returned it like to the 35 or something. It was a 3-and-out where they gained 5 yards. And then they kicked the long field goal. That was their field goal. Then the scoring drive for South Dakota State, they picked off Spencer Petras, the Iowa quarterback, who absolutely stinks. They pick him off in Iowa side of the field. They did get 1 first down on that drive, but that was it. It was like 7 plays for like 12 yards was that drive, and then they kicked the field goal. Whole point being, Iowa's offense is absolutely terrible. But as I said on Twitter yesterday, this is the most Kirk Ferentz team that has ever existed, because this may be Kirk Ferentz's worst offense, and I'm talking of his career. 20 plus, he's been there forever.
It is really amazing that a team can somehow make Illinois' 3 possessions inside the 15 with 0 points. Not the worst offensive performance of the week.
Right. I mean, indeed, you combine that awful offense with what is going to be, if not the best combination of defense and special teams that Ferentz has had at Iowa, way up there, like, top 3. Iowa's defense is nasty, and we knew it was going to be nasty. They're bringing back a whole bunch of guys. They have several stars on that defense. They have stars at every single level, All-American candidates, certainly at linebacker and in the secondary. Super duper nasty. And then their special teams are really, really good. Like the punter that they have, this kid named Tory Taylor from Australia, probably going to be in the NFL. He's got a big, big leg, and he is awesome at the directional kicking, but also like the coffin corner, stuff like that. So Iowa's able to do the thing of just, the paint dry thing, and just playing the field position game. And then, you're around midfield, you pin the other team deep. So you start with the ball at midfield. You don't do anything on offense. You punt it back to them. They're pinned way back again. Eventually something will happen for you, but that's how it's going to have to happen sort of for Iowa this year, it appears, at least until their starting running back comes back, because Gavin Williams did miss the first game. I think that was something that was a little bit overlooked. He'd been ruled out right before it, so maybe some people overlooked that. But LaShawn Daniels, the backup, didn't have the best game. I think he ran for like 70 yards, but it was on like 3 yards a carry. Part of that might have been offensive line stuff. It's not because he's necessarily super duper limited, but it's also because South Dakota State realized pretty quick into that game that they could just stack the box because Spencer Petras is terrible. Spencer Petras wouldn't even be starting in the FCS, or shouldn't even be starting in the FCS, in my opinion. You want to talk about accuracy versus lacking pocket presence. So that is what Iowa is going to have to overcome this year. But again, nasty, top 3 defense maybe in the entire nation, and top 3 to 5 special teams unit in the nation. But then like a bottom 20 offense out of the 131 FBS teams. That's the combo you got there. Iowa State, we're still going to have to see on them. We haven't gotten a whole bunch of information because they played Southeast Missouri State in the opener. Did win 42-10. The new kid that they're starting for Brock Purdy, this Hunter Deckers kid, he looked pretty good. 25 for 31, 293 yards, 4 touchdowns. The running back that took over for Breece Hall, another young kid, Jareel Brock, he looked pretty good too. He had 104 yards and a touchdown. But again, it's an FCS opponent. Iowa State had turned over a lot of their roster this offseason because this was the year that we knew that like Campbell was building it up towards last season when they had all the seniors. You had Purdy and you had Breece Hall and you had Kolar and all the different guys that they had. They lose all those guys. This is more like the new look young Cyclones. So we'll have to see when they play a real opponent. Specifically, it's going to come down to Deckers and to Brock. Can Brock run it all on this Iowa defense? I'm not sure that he will be able to. I really don't. And then Hunter Deckers, what is he going to give you? Hunter Deckers is certainly more talented than Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy's more like your Ian Book scrambling around noodle arm kind of a guy, whereas Hunter Deckers is like a legitimate 4-star, that was like an enormous recruiting win for them. But we've never seen him, like over a full game against a good defense before. So this one's going to be really interesting. I am showing line value on the Hawkeyes. I think this line was open a bit short, especially in lieu of the fact that this game is in Iowa City. It was open short because of how brutal Iowa's offense looked, and fair enough with that. But my numbers in a vacuum have installed Iowa as a 6.5-point favorite. So I'm showing a little bit of line value on Iowa. You're just going to have to hold your nose and hope for the best with that offense.
Now, one more game here before we get to your hammer of the week. UAB versus Liberty. Liberty catching 4 points in this one, and you think that is too many points for them to be catching?
Yeah, with an asterisk. Yeah, so the UAB opens as a 4-point favorite on the road. My adjusted line was UAB minus 1.6. UAB had a dominant defensive performance against a subdivision team in week 1. They did not have their starting running back, Dwayne McBride. You're going to want to check on his status if you're interested on either side of this game. Dwayne McBride is one of the best G5 running backs last year. So it'll be interesting to see if he plays. But on the other side, we have really big injury news that I think is also playing a part in the way that this line opened. Liberty had signed Charlie Brewer from Utah via Baylor, where he'd started his career. In the transfer portal in an attempt to replace Malik Willis at quarterback. Brewer, starts out this game and then he gets injured right away. And he is out for, I believe, the next 2 months. He's out for the timeline they gave him was 6 to 8 weeks. He has a broken hand, which he suffered in their overtime win against Southern Miss. So he's going to be out until, late October, probably. So what Liberty did when he first went out of the game, because it was pretty early, they brought in this veteran backup that I had never heard of. And it's pretty hard to get a quarterback into an FBS game that I've never heard of. But it's this kid named Jonathan Bennett, I guess. But Bennett stunk. He went, maybe this is why I'd never heard of him before. He went 7 for 18 for 38 yards. And so then Hugh Freeze did probably what he should have done right at the start. He went to the bullpen for Caden Salter. For people that don't know Caden Salter came out of high school, was a ballyhooed recruit, signed with Tennessee, was a consensus top 175 overall recruit, solid 4-star recruit. It was top 10 overall quarterback as well. Dual threat kid, was not only a star on the gridiron, but was also fabulous in track and field, all the different events, the 300 meters and the different sprints and the hurdles and all that different stuff, was a star. But he signed with Tennessee and he got in trouble off the field almost immediately after he got there, or it came to light, one or the other. Tennessee didn't really have an option but to say, hey, kid, you got to get out of here, and boot him off the team. So then he was available. Liberty, which would never get sort of like with Malik Willis, although Malik Willis had been on campus for a couple of years at Auburn, just couldn't get on. But like you don't usually get access to this kind of recruit or those kind of athletes unless it's a special circumstance like that. They bring in Keaton Salter and sign him. Then he opens the season as QB3, but he quickly gets into the game because of Brewer's injury and then this Bennett stinking. And Salter looked awesome. Very, very good. In a game where it was very, very nip and tuck kind of a game, if Salter had not played the way that he did, Liberty would have lost that game. They ended up beating Southern Miss in multiple overtimes. But Keaton Salter went 8 for 13 in that game, 148 yards, 2 touchdowns, 65 rushing yards. I think the important point here, assuming that Keaton Salter is going to start on Saturday, haven't heard word on that. I would be stunned if Hugh Freeze decides not to start him. Talent-wise, between him and that Bennett character, not even close. But the interesting thing to note about Salter is his game is far more similar to Malik Willis than Charlie Brewer, the guy that they expected to be starting this year. There was modifications that they had built into the offense for Charlie Brewer, who is more of he's a pocket passer. He's a pocket passer with a noodle arm, but he does have pocket presence. He does have accuracy. He just can't get the ball down the field. You're not going to get much utility with him running the ball. Again, Keaton Salter is way more on the Malik Willis phylum. Extremely athletic kid, has a strong arm. He's the very loose sort of arm action that you associate with Malik Willis. Nobody has that kind of arm strength, but more in that vein, certainly. So Liberty now, Hugh Freeze is going to be able to go back more to the concepts that they were doing last year. And a lot of the returning skill guys were already super comfortable with. So I actually, you see a G5 team that had signed a guy that we all knew of in Charlie Brewer, a guy who had thrown for over 10,000 yards in the P5. And then you see he gets injured in week 1. Your natural assumption would be, oh man, that team's going to be a dog until he comes back. That they're for sure a fade. I actually don't think that in this case, because if Keaton Salter takes over, as I expect him to, the ceiling of your offense now goes up. What you had with Brewer is more the cost certainty stuff. But don't forget, Charlie Brewer was a guy who 2 or 3 games into last season, Utah could not move the ball at all. And they started out like 1-2 or whatever. They told Charlie Brewer essentially they definitely yanked him out of the starting lineup. But then Charlie Brewer's like, fine, I'm taking my ball and going home or whatever. Right after that, Utah's offense got awesome. It didn't get worse. It got way better. When Cameron Rising took over, just took an enormous jump up. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. I do see some line value on Liberty here. If you're interested in Liberty, though, this is a situation that I would monitor. I'll be monitoring it. But if I was you, look into the reports, look into who they say that they're going to start, different statuses like that. If it's Salter, though, this is a team that I'm going to be potentially looking to back here over the next month.
All right, now it is time, my friend, for your hammer of the week. And I know where you're going here. And it's the one game we haven't talked about. We said we were going to get to here. The greatest football team in the state of New York, my friend. Dino Babers, risen from the dead. We were on a phone call last week where I told you Syracuse is between a rock and a hard place where they want to get rid of him, but they can't because of his contract. And then here we go right out the gate. I'm not saying we want Bama. I'm saying we want Buffalo. Josh Allen wishes he could be the dual threat that Garrett Schrader is here. Syracuse takes on the Huskies of Connecticut as 20.5-point favorites here in this one.
Oh man, that's a tough act for me to follow. It must have, at your place last night, it must have been like manna falling from the sky. When Syracuse was just absolutely running it up on Louisville. One of the most stunning, I know that you're a Syracuse guy, but objectively, one of the most stunning results of week 1. Louisville goes in there as, I think that line closed at like Louisville -5.5, Louisville -6, so somewhere in that range. They got annihilated. Syracuse beats them 31-7. After the first quarter, it was 10-7. It was close-ish. From there on out, it was all Syracuse. Louisville couldn't do a thing, and Syracuse was essentially doing whatever it wanted to. It played there was a brief stretch where Tucker got pulled out, but
that was heart attack inducing. Everyone in my college group chat just went, "Oh, yep, There it goes. That fleeting figment of happiness that we had is gone. And then he came back in the game. We couldn't believe it.
And that's the important thing for both Syracuse fans and then people interested in betting on Syracuse. By far their best player, Sean Tucker, comes back into the game, looked fine in the second half. So his availability will not be compromised going forward. Garrett Schrader looked pretty good too. And I think that, and I'm talking about as a thrower, as good as you're going to get Garrett Schrader to look, I think that that's notable because Babers over the offseason did something really interesting. I'm not going to go back to my Brian Windhorst, but he did something that was very interesting where got rid of the offensive coordinator, brings in Robert Anae from Virginia. The only reason that Anae was available was because his buddy Bronco Mendenhall, who he had worked for, under forever, Bronco Mendenhall decides to walk away from the game. So then Virginia brought in, the Clemson offensive coordinator, and he wanted his own guy running the offense. But Robert Anae is going back, decade plus, he's viewed as one of the most respected offensive coordinators in the game. And his strategy has always been this quick hitting sideline to sideline passing game that then opens up the rest of it. And then you can start playing tempo. You start confusing the defense, get them tired and stuff like that. What was interesting thinking about him melding with this personnel was Syracuse, their foot that they were led with, and the thing that they were by far the best at, it was that physical rushing attack with, you had both Schrader and then you had Tucker, where it was like sort of option concepts, but out of the shotgun. It was like it wasn't Rich Rod West Virginia, but it was like, it was more in that sort of a vein of an offense, and they were not throwing nearly as much. You wondered if Schrader, who's a big kid with good mobility, has a decent arm, but the accuracy has never been there. You wondered how that would translate. At least as far as game one goes, the returns are pretty good. 18 for 25, 237 yards, and 2 touchdowns throwing the ball. And of course, Tucker looked good as well. You wonder with that is, what was this? Was it that Syracuse is way better than we think? Is it that Louisville was way worse than we think? Is it a combination of both? We'll have to see on that in these weeks coming up, but absolutely Syracuse is better than we thought coming into the year. And I think that there's reasons, again, that you can explain it. They're going to be better passing the ball this year, and that is naturally going to keep defenses from stacking the box, which is the only way that you could stop Tucker and the Schrader ground game last year. Looking into this one, this line opened at Syracuse minus 20.5. They're at UConn. The surprising part to me was that it did not open up north of 21.5, particularly in lieu of that result against Louisville. And maybe that was just an opener where you're coming off the night games before. So maybe that whole thing had not been baked in. I don't know. It's hard for me to explain it otherwise. My line on this one was Syracuse minus 25.4. And I like UConn a decent amount. Like I backed them in week one when they had that competitive game against Utah State. Last week they beat an FCS team. Their offense really didn't do much, but they only gave up 3 points. But in FCS team, but I like them fine. They definitely give effort for Jim Moore. They're going to be better than they've been in seasons past. But they're going to have major problems on offense here. And having a good offense against Syracuse is where you'd think you'd be able to score points, although they just held the team that with Malik Cunningham, multiple NFL running backs, and some NFL receivers to 7 points and literally zero in the last 3 quarters combined. So we'll see. Maybe Syracuse's defense is significantly better than we thought. But UConn's offense, major problems, both with the personnel overall, but then also the quarterback that they thought was going to be their quarterback, but also one of their 2 best offensive players, Taquan Roberson, who Jim Mora had signed from Penn State. Roberson had been the top backup to Sean Clifford. He brings him in and was going to build the offense around him, and then their running back Nathan Carter, and then try to do maybe sort of a version of what Syracuse did last year of just running the ball a lot, the clock control things, that sort of stuff. But Taquan Roberson got hurt immediately in that game against Utah State. The backups that they have tried have not been good with UConn. That was the reason why they lost to Utah State. I believe if Roberson had not gotten hurt in that game, I actually think UConn probably would have sprung the upset. I think the difference is that big between him and his backups, and UConn was in that thing until the bitter end. The backups also did not play very good this past game. Like I said, they were playing the FCS team, Central Connecticut. They win 28-3. The quarterback that they played, this Zion Turner, He threw for 172 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. His QBR was 26.9, so not terribly impressive. He also does not give you the level of mobility that Taquan Roberson does. That was what his foot was led with. I think UConn is going to be overwhelmed here by Syracuse. They're going to be overwhelmed certainly by the rushing game. You can put it in the books that Tucker's going to have two home runs at least on the ground. And then if Schrader is throwing as well as he did in the last game, I think UConn is really, really cooked. I also struggle. You flip the ball or you flip it to the other side of the field. I struggle to see how this UConn offense is going to move the ball with Zion Turner, the backup quarterback. Until Roberson comes back, they're going to have issues there. I do like the running back, Nathan Carter. Nathan Carter is a good player. He's a legitimately good player. He's going to get a look from the NFL, maybe as a UDFA. Maybe he can sneak into one of the last rounds, but he's a legitimately good player. But Syracuse is going to be able to gang up on them, as Syracuse was frustrated last year when everyone decided to gang up on Tucker. So they're going to be able to give UConn a little bit, a taste of the medicine that they had to choke down last year. Now they can throw the ball. Now the defense is better. I think Syracuse is going to boat race UConn on Saturday.
I mean, I certainly hope so. My biggest worry with this team was the penalties. The penalties in that game were absolutely ridiculous. They need to get those under control. But even with Jim Mora, even with UConn looking not quite like the UConn of old, maybe definitely for better, but how much better? I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm excited about what this team is doing. In 1 week, one game has completely made me do a 180 from, well, we're a basketball school, it's time for basketball season already, to, okay, hang on a second, dust off that number one trophy. We might be making a college football playoff run here.
Yeah, how far you've come in 5, 6, 7 days. I remember we had that one phone call where you were pretty low on Dino, heading into this season and stuff like that, and then now we have the 31-7 one, and you're like the coach in like in the locker room after the game who's just won a blowout, who's like yelling at the defense because they gave up like one long completion, and then you're talking about the penalties. I love this. I think Syracuse is heading towards 2-0. And Dino might be rallying back here into the good grace. A guy who was on one of the hottest seats, if not the hottest seat in all of college football heading into the season. He basically took the flames from his seat, walked them across the field, and added those to the inferno that is now around Scott Satterfield. The pressure's gone down a little bit on Dino. I think it's going to go down a little bit more after they take this gimme win against UConn. And then you start talking about, can Dino get back into the bowl game? He's been there. This is year 7 now, year 6, 7. Only been to the one bowl game, but that was the awesome season where they won double-digit games. Yeah. This team could be headed back to a bowl game, which is going to extend Dino's time there. And that would be awesome because Dino Baber is the man.
As a person, absolutely nothing I can say about him other than great things. I would love to see this all work out. I'd love to see Syracuse going bowling again. But for now, that is going to wrap it up for us here. Thor, if people want to find you and the great work you're doing, what's the best way they can do that?
You can find me on Twitter at ThorKU, or you can find my work on Betting Pros predominantly, a little bit of Fantasy Pros, but mostly on Betting Pros. And we got a whole bunch of it. The show with Thomas. We got shows with Bogman, middle of the week. We got our live show Thomas and I do with Mike Farrell on Saturdays, kickoff show leading into the kickoffs for an hour and a half. Go through every game, betting deep dive on every single game, DFS props, different stuff like that. And then my updated power rankings are already submitted to the editor. Those should be up either tonight or tomorrow morning. I'll have week 1 notes up on Betting Pros on either on Monday or on Tuesday morning, with all my adjusted lines for every game this week against the Las Vegas spread, and then going through and talking about some injuries, some notable things, also some games that you're going to want to hit early on in the week. We hit on some injuries, and this year several injuries. Didn't get to all of them. Like, for instance, Tyler Shuck, Texas Tech starting quarterback, he is hurt again. He hurt his left shoulder again and is going to be missing what looks to be at least a month. So they got some issues. There were some other quarterback injuries as well. Check that one out. We didn't have time to get to all of them on this episode, but check that out, and we'll go through the rest and how those are affecting lines.
All right. Thank you so much. As always, Thor, we will catch you right back here next week. And of course, you can check out the Wednesday show that will drop on podcast platforms of your choice, specifically whatever you're listening or watching this show on, you'll be able to catch the Wednesday show there. And of course, Saturday mornings with Scott. Saturday mornings with Mike.
Saturday mornings with Mike.
Saturday mornings with Mike. Guys, that's going to do it for us here. Best of luck this week. And Sean Tucker for Heisman.
Go Syracuse.